What's up? I'm OLAN and I'm back again with another track breakdown of my newest song, If You Need Me. I don't want to hold you too long, so I'll try to get right into it. Just a note that I will be posting as many of the patches as I can that are like stock Ableton stuff that's going to be free and immediate to use for you. So that'll be in the description along with my site, merch, where you can pre-order the new album Floating Worlds, because we announced that last week too. And yes, let's get right into it. So what makes this song so special, or what's so cool about it, is it's not really that far off from what the initial demo sounded like. This again was in the process of me writing songs in an entire day. This is when I was really in the flow of it. So I noticed that this track had the least amount of changes. I noticed that every time I tried to mix it, it just didn't have the same character that made it so special to begin with, which just happens sometimes. But there are a lot of really cool tricks with this song, as simple as it is. It was a really helpful determining factor in how I approached a lot of my album moving forward. We'll just get right into it. First off, I have my kick that's just a 4 to the floor. As usual, I'll use an EQ compressor and saturator to taste. I didn't use it in this case because I didn't think it needed it, but it's these exact, the glue compressors always has this setting of attack and release, and then I'll push the threshold based on how far back in the mix I want something to be. Next, I have snares. I have a rim shot because I actually don't really like the sound of snares, which I blame listening to Subtract for, but I kept it pretty simple. So I have a regular clap here, and then I have a reversed snare to give things a little bit of a, it just helps with the groove. It's just a little tiny detail, but I think it goes a long way with your loops when you're making them. And then I have these two other rim shots that serve as like, they're like ghost notes on a snare to kind of give things pocket, and the other is to give the clap sound a bit more mid-range so it fills the mix out in that way, because when claps are just like really bright, it can bug me. So that's just a personal choice. Because without it, it just thickens it up. And it's just worth noting when you're designing your drums, whether it be through actual sound design or with layering samples, I try not to do too much. I used to layer a ton because I thought it made me look smarter, but it's really not the case. If something sounds bright to you and you're like, oh, I want something with more body, choose a sample that does that to you, and vice versa. That's how you can approach your layering in a way that feels more intentional to what you're doing. So that's really all it is. There's not any mixing really on the individual sounds, and I didn't do anything to the actual group either, which is crazy. Again, this is like just making sure I liked what I wrote, which is wild. I do have the clap going by itself in the build. And I'm not going to lie to you, I don't think I would have done a clap buildup like this if I didn't go on tour with Odessa. This was never something that I particularly thought I would do, but it just made sense for this song. That wash sound is a trick that I stole from Nisaya. It's the supermassive reverb that's free. And I just set the delay note. This time, I normally do 16ths, but this time I did an 8th note. Come on. I did an 8th note and just turned the mix up, and that's what's giving that like, that like sound. I do that all the time in my build-ups, and that is like straight up a trick that I stole from a Nisaya like studio breakdown. So shout out to him. Next up, I have my top section. I'm pretty sure. Hold on. Okay, so this is from a producer called Rob Late, who does a lot of like courses and stuff. He had this like guitar strumming sample that I just chopped to go with the groove. And kind of, it also serves as kind of like ghost notes with the snare. And it's just to give it texture. I cut out all the low end because it doesn't need to be there. It's just to give it texture. It's so funny that like none of these hats ended up making it, but this is what I mean by like when I start an idea, I still do it. It's such a horrible habit, but I'll layer sounds so much in the high end because I think it'll like make it sound better, but it like genuinely won't be the case. But I do keep this hat. This is something I do a lot where I have a hi-hat go in the last bar of a loop and then reverse it on the very last hit. So it sounds like this. That's all it's doing. My hats don't have any mixing really. I do. Here, I'll show you. It's this trick that I mentioned before where like I'll filter something out with auto filters so that I don't really have to take it out of the song entirely. It can just be a gradual flow into the next section. So things don't feel as abrupt, it's not complicated, but it does feel nice. And makes room for what I want to be at the center, like what you want to be the focus. More tops. I ended up using, let's see. Oh, little percussive hits. And I treat this kind of like I do my breaks where I'm just trying to get a very specific like pocket. And it's something that's hard to explain, but I usually start to do this sort of detail work after I have my chord progression for the same reason as the breaks, where like if you have your core situation, like your core drums and even a bass line or progression, you can sort of write your percussion to that. It feels unified with the rest of the song instead of just throwing on a loop. Not to say that doesn't work, but again, it's just making sure things feel more custom to you, I guess. And that's all this That's all it's doing. I have this loop hi-hat that I ended up using instead of all this extra shit. Notice that with these two sounds, they have different timbres. So one is a lot more harsh or present, and the other is kind of washy sounding. I'll do that on purpose. If I could go back, I would probably pan these, but I didn't. And I guess it still sounds good to me, but it's the same thing with guitars. Like if you ever have recorded guitars for a band or for yourself, if you're going to do more than one track, it's helpful to make sure they have different tones. So if one guitar is going to be super crunchy and distorted and riffing, it can be easier for you to mix, and it can also be it just sounds pleasant when the other guitar is just doing, maybe it has chorus, maybe it has delay or reverb, but it's processed differently than the other. And then you can pan these wide, and it gives the song just this really immersive flavor. And it's also so much easier for you to mix because they are not doing the exact same thing. I don't know how to explain it further than that, but once I started treating most of my sounds like that, it made mixing a lot easier for me. Next up, I have a perk from Not Battery, that's for sure. It's another Rob Late sample. Very syncopated. This drum beat's actually kind of wonky now that I think about it. Something in the low end to work like as a tom. And I'm sure it's just to give the kick a friend to hang out with. Again, it's just trying to make sure that the drums have a little something special. Like you're making sure they talk to each other. You're providing space. If you'll notice that, like if they do hit at the same time, I try to make sure that they're not in the same frequency. If they do, I try to make sure they have a different timbre or different pitch, or they're panned. There's a few different ways you can go about it. Moving on, I did this in the last song too. I'll do this all the time. I don't care. It's such an EDM trick to just add a ride. So now we got... It just makes things feel more high energy. In this track at all, it really was just about sample selection and making sure things had their space. Bass line, which I can give you this patch because it's just a wavetable. It starts with a sort of square wave. I will try to vary between doing square or saw because you never really know which one is going to fit better. I'll use sine waves if I know I want something to sound like cool or sorry, if I want it to sound like smooth and easy on the ears. But in this case, I wanted something really plucky sounding. The envelope is pretty much standard. That's how it comes when you open the plugin. Most of the legwork is happening with this second envelope here, where I have the filter mapped to envelope 2. And the way I think of sound design in general is your amp in whatever envelope, you can draw it in the shape that you want it to behave. So notice how like you're drawing in the shape that you want it to articulate itself. And I feel like once I started thinking of it that way, made it a lot easier to pick out my sounds. And you can do, it's a back and forth between something like that and then picking out the timbre. And they have a different flavor. It'd be more pronounced if I was like, I think because the filter's so low, you can kind of get away with using whatever you want. But then I have a noise setting here on the unison. I don't think that's necessary in this case. I usually add noise to make something feel more present. Utility to keep it mono. I cut out all the highs. And then, yeah, some glue compression. And then a saturator, a bit warmer preset, almost always. Next up is a lot of fun. I can give out this chord. I use this chord patch on a lot of the album, and I'm pretty sure I don't use this analog lab, but I do use this wavetable. And like I said, it's a sine wave. I use the voices over here, like gave it some shimmer, and the voicing over here is to make it feel just wider and kind of detuned to itself, and it's really cool. That's all it's doing. And pushing it makes it sound even more like warbly. But like I said, I usually use sine waves when I want something to feel really just like chilled out. It's also great for subs. Utility, I have this. It's funny that I don't do it here, but I have this auto filter to take out the low end as the track is building. I did it over here, but not on this beginning section. Then I have EQ to take out lows. It still doesn't feel that way. As you can see, I cut out a lot in the mids because otherwise it was just so abrasive. Glue, doing that sort of like depth thing that I like to do versus pushing it back in the mix. A bit warmer. Is this Valhalla Supermassive? Yeah. Doing that same effect that I talked about with the snares. And then again, like this was a sound where the mids were driving me insane, but I wanted to keep it. So I have these very drastic, nasty cuts in the mids. And I can show you why I end up doing something like this later. I think I talked about it in my last video, but I don't remember. Next are my, the plucks. This sort of chord theory approach I learned from a video of Tails. It was from Tails, I want to say, where he talks about this sort of chord theory that if you want to sound like a Flume track, or it's like pretty much anything that feels like uplifting or hopeful in dance music kind of uses this, where you find the note that you want to be prominent, and then you go, I want to say it's like 3, no, it's like 2 in the scale down. Yeah. And then you drop that down an octave. If you'll notice, like I have the scale here and it's just 2 down from that. So in this case, see that purple there? And then just drop it down. It's just that. And the important thing here is that I pick my top note first. Whatever I want to feel like the pushing feeling or note that's like the melodic aspect, I start there and then pick its harmonic. Because when I try to do it the other way around, I get I lose the plot. Like that method I just told you is a lot easier for me personally. And don't be afraid to just use the scale here, especially if you're not used to writing chords in different keys or you just want to like experiment more. Just use this as a guide so that it narrows down your options so that you can focus on writing a strong progression. So this patch is almost exactly identical to the bass. It's just an octave up. And I want to say the bass has a little bit more saw wave in the wavetable. But it's the exact same approach of like picking your sound source. The amp, I actually decided to shape it into like a pluckier sound. And then the legwork of that filter dictating the voicing of that along with the amp. These two work together to decide how the amp is going, how the synth is going to talk. Again, if you can kind of picture it visually, it makes it so much easier to design something like a pad where you know it's going to need something a lot longer and more pronounced. Maybe it has a really long release because you want it to just like go. But if you want a pluck, it needs to be literally like drawn like a pluck. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but you can kind of visualize how you want the sound to shape and how you want it to articulate itself. Utility just to make it loud. EQ, take out low end because I didn't need it. There was so much. And OTT, which is insane. Glue, try to saturate, side chains to the kick. The opposite, so just to note, that's one side. The other is muted. It's an actual like plucky sound. And again, the point here is to make something sound fuller by using two things that are they might be playing the same thing, but they're different timbres. They sound distinctly different from each other. They're occupying different spaces in the mix, and they complement each other. I didn't do a ton of mixing on this either. The point was to just get it sitting. Because without it sounds cool, but that extra pluck gives it so much more body, in my opinion. More EQ in the mids. I have a constant fight with the mids anytime I work on music. And then I side-chained it to the kick and the rim, which is like really unhinged behavior. This next sound, I think, is the most fun. Like, I think this is the coolest part of the song, honestly, or the most like one of the most creative things that I got to do on this, working on this record. So I think I mentioned in my last video that I wanted my vocals to be treated more like a synth. So like I only wrote like one ballad on the entire album, but this track I distinctly wanted to feel like my vocals just a sample that you could pick out of anywhere you wanted, but record them myself and it be my voice. So what I did is I took the vocal that I initially recorded. You can let it show. They don't need to know how. And I ran it through so much distortion. I don't even know if I have it. I'll run it through a ton of like fuzz and reverb and just get it sounding absolutely like incoherent. And then I compressed it really hard so that it's sitting behind the vocal. Saturation, as you can see, a ton of fuzz. This like synthetic drum room, which I feel like adds even more distortion. And then side chaining it to my vocals and side chaining it to the kick. So I'll show you what that does. They don't need to know how you want me. You can hear my voice in there, but like in the context of the song, it sounds like it doesn't sound like that. And then it's pitched up for the second half. I pitched it up an octave, that's all. But in context of the song, you can't tell what that is. I think I was so proud of myself for doing that. The vocals, I stacked a lot of it, kind of out of self-consciousness. There's not that much going on. There's like auto-tune to tighten it, and again to make it feel, I'm not trying to make it feel natural whatsoever. Rift again is like a distortion mangling plugin. It's to make sure things don't feel natural. Some EQ, compressor, saturation, OTT, all of these things to give it like brightness, to make it feel like too polished in a way. And I did that 3 times, which is crazy. Are they at least panned? Yes. Okay, I did pan them. One thing I do want to look at is, oh, here it is. Okay, so that the effect that I like to do with my voice, where it's formant shifting. Here, I'll show you the automation that I drew. Without this, there's a filter that's kind of taking out a lot of the highs, but it sounds more like my voice. What this formant shifter is doing, it feels like it's pitching, but it's like bending my voice in a way that gave it so much character. And I was doing this so much to my voice in throughout the album, because I felt like it was something that it was such a simple technique. And I'll either draw it in, like in this case, I drew in the automation. If I wasn't feeling like it, I would just throw on Ableton stock LFO, which I think is in my toolbox. Yeah, you can throw on something like LFO and then map this to the formant, and it will do it for you. And you can work the pacing, but I think for this, I just wanted control over how much things were being manipulated. But you can let it show. They don't need to know how you hold me close. If you need me now. You can see how it's kind of like kind of going in and out of sounding back like my voice, and then going into like chipmunk, and then going back into the more like, it's like, it's not necessarily like pitching it, but it's giving it that impression. And I think that's so cool. Something else that I did with this is automating reverbs and delays. So in the breakdowns, the vocal is very ethereal and sparse. And I completely overdo it. And then when the drop hits, I completely dried everything out, and it brings it right back to center, where like it's really sweet and floaty to go with the cool chords. And then as soon as the drums come in, it all tightens up, and that contrast I feel like is why the drop is able to hit the way it does. That buildup is it's completely different, even if it's using the same elements. The processing of reverb and delay and the synth choices, it just gives it this flavor, so that when the drop hits, it's so right in your face. So like in context, I'll show you. It's not getting louder, it's just dry. There's no reverb on it, which I think can go a long way. So next up, I have a backing vocal. I don't even remember what this is doing. Okay, yeah. It's a falsetto. It's just a falsetto with OTT, a lot of reverb and EQ, but it's just to give, like in the second half of the song, it's just to give it a little bit of air. I don't know what happened with that panning. Don't look at that. It's so tuned to hell. That's all it's doing. It's just to give it a little bit of icing. This vocal effect, again, I don't remember what. Oh, it's I do this a lot. This delay, if you'll notice, it's in 6, but I'll do it in 3. It's the same shit. And I learned this kind of from listening to a lot of house music, but like you'll hear this like triplet delay, and it adds so much just like flair to a song. It makes you feel like you're zooming through space, and it's tucked really far back in the mix. I have it like EQ'd to hell. There's a phaser, there's a ton of reverb, and then just side chaining it to my vocal and the kick. But it's just there to give, like, it's just to fill out the mix and make things feel ethereal again. You can hardly hear it. Sometimes I do that effect in a more pronounced way, but that's all it's doing. Next up, I have pads that are done with Vital, which is a free synth. It's just it's like a saw wave and a sine wave. And it's like, these settings are so silly. I didn't even need to have the sound in here looking like this. Especially with ROM. It's just a reverb from Native Instruments. I have another pad. This is Granulator, which is, I'm sure, Granulator is basically just it's a subtractive synthesizer. You just throw a sample in it and it just stretches things out. If you're familiar with Paul's stretch, it kind of does that in it's just a more direct way to do it. I feel like Paul's stretch is like a lot of trial and error. You get great results, but I feel like this is like quick and easy to manipulate, and you just treat it like a synth. Take out all the lows. I'm using auto filters to sort of take it in and out of the mix and then compress. It's interesting, normally with auto pan, I'd have it moving all over the place, like all over the mix, because it's with a pad sound, you don't need it to be this focal point. You can have it kind of moving around in the stereo field. This high pad, clearly just for texture. It's a sine wave. Don't even need the filter on there if we're being honest. Utility, take out the mids. Auto filter to take it out of the mix. And then Valhalla Supermassive. Then standard compressor, a bit warmer, sidechain to the kick. Didn't even do that. That's crazy. Excuse me, that's straight up all it's doing. I do have a shimmer on here with voices to give it some more width. This might seem obvious to some people, but like if I want something to feel high energy, I go higher in pitch. I feel like that is a really natural way to imply a sense of more energy. Brightness or higher pitch feels more energetic to me. This ripping sound goes a long way though. That sound really takes it there, I think. But I do the same technique there of like doing that, but then bringing it up in the second round of it's to imply more energy. After that, I have effects that aren't doing a damn thing. This is a forest noise. It's like birds chirping. You can hardly hear it. I have vinyl crackling. I have a recording from like an airplane hangar or something, and then sweeps, and that's all my effects. And it's just to give the song a noise floor. Sometimes that can really it just gives a little more character to a mix. I do that supermassive technique that I talked about on the master. And then my like pre-master situation that I send out is straight up just a multiband compressor and a limiter, and that's it. And then this is for streaming, but this is pretty much my master chain. And that's it. I think I mentioned this in the last video, but I'll say it again if you're new. When I am mixing and deciding what is causing problems, sometimes I can overdo it. But I'll take 2 filters on an EQ and I'll push it so that everything is kind of centered around the mids. So it sounds like that. And like that'll usually tell you what's competing. And sometimes I'll even grab a utility and throw it in mono. And I'll kind of sweep through. And again, with this song, the sample selection was a lot more, it made my job a lot easier with the mix. So when I went back and did the things I normally do like that, I feel like it kind of took the life out of the mix. So you kind of have to be careful with that sort of thing. But that method can be so revealing about like what is stepping on, what sounds are kind of stepping on each other. But yeah, that's the song. It's so simple. It's super short and sweet. And I think it's a good example of like not needing a ton of things to just make a song that feels good. And that's all this really is. It's like a really sweet song about feeling like you can be there for somebody that you care about and not putting too much thought into it. So, like I said, you can grab the patches that I used in this song in a link below. It will take you to my website where you can get merch and vinyl as well. I'm going to be announcing show dates next week. Next week, I'm going to start announcing some show dates for this new tour. And yeah, you can also pre-order the album on Bandcamp or pre-save it wherever you want. We just announced Floating Worlds, my second album, last week. And I'm really excited to share it. I worked really hard on it. And it's always really cool to take all this time alone to go through a journey and put something like this together, together like this massive project that feels like a time capsule of where you're at, but then being able to share that with other people and realize you're on the same page. And even if it doesn't make like sad feelings like go away or doesn't make them right, it's so nice to be able to connect with people that listen to it and be like, no, I'm right there with you. So I'm so excited to share this, and I feel blessed to like be able to share my project file or sounds and have people like use them, which again, if you do, like tag me in it. I'd love to hear what you make. But we're getting close. New album is out August 2nd, and again, I'm so excited to share it with you. So that's all from me. I will see you in the next one.